Do you remember playing outside during recess and we would play in the trees a lot?
Yes.
Do you remember how it kind of like felt like we would lose track of time? And it's like, you kind of got like the sense like, hey, are we lost right now? Do people know where we are?
Yeah, I remember like the trees at our middle school and we would like climb them and it was just so fun.
Yeah, like it was kind of like it's our own little world and we were lost in the trees. But I always got like this kind of lingering sense where it's like, okay, like we're in the trees. And to be honest, our middle school wasn't that big, so I don't know why I made such a big deal out of it. But it's also like, what happened if we got kidnapped or what happened if we died? Like, would anyone ever find us? Realistically, our playground was like pretty small and the trees were like maybe 5 steps off of it. So yeah, they would have been able to find our bodies.
Yeah.
But I don't know. As a kid, everything always felt so much bigger than what it actually was. Like, especially like if you come to like Calgary and you're like, whoa, I'm in the big city now. Oh, there's skyscrapers and they're so high. And like now it's like, whoa, they're like kind of small. Or maybe that's just like my ego's too big now. I don't know.
No, I get that because it's like when you come from like Red Deer and then you go to Calgary and it's just like so much bigger, but then you go to like LA and you're like, oh,
Yeah, you're like, wow, the world really is so big. But it actually is that big. Especially, I find I have like this kind of wanderlust when I look at the world. It's like, okay, like someone really can just like have their everyday life, their family, their kids, whatever, their pets, they have a job. People know them. And then all of a sudden, one day, they'll just go missing. And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. It was the discovery of 2 deceased electronic technicians on a remote hillside near Rio de Janeiro. They were clad in formal suits and raincoats despite this sweltering August weather. Each of them had a crudely fashioned iron mask on their faces, and immediately, there was an enigma that surrounded the countryside where they died for decades, with no defining resolution. It's a perplexing scene where they were found. There was a cryptic note found near the bodies, which hinted at planned sequence of events that culminated in the use of their peculiar masks. And there's all sorts of weird shit that happens in today's case. There's not only police negligence that happens regarding finding out how they died, there's a possible like gang, there's a government cover up, maybe, where the FBI and the military got involved. And then there's also aliens involved in today's case.
aliens.
Yeah. Hi, and welcome to the Decomposing Fire podcast. We are excited to have you with us as we delve into some truly intriguing and occasionally true crime cases. I'm your host, Kira, and with me is Jen. Everything we say in our podcast is information that we've gathered through testimonies, interviews, documents, and trustful sources. Any opinion we say is our own opinion. If we get any information wrong, and today's case is very confusing, there's a lot of like, it could be this, it could be that, hypothesis this. Everything's kind of up for speculation, but feel free to let us know what you think in the comments or what you think might have happened. We mean no disrespect to any of the victims or anyone affected by this case. Today, we're going to be discussing the lead masks case. But before we get started, I just want to let you know we're going to be talking about some aliens. So if you're like, yo, I don't check out with any of those alien things, go check out our other podcasts. Feel free to grab yourself a snack, sit down, because this one is going to be a long one. On the afternoon of August 20th, a young boy who was just flying a kite, as we do, especially when it's really nice. Like the day before, there had just been like this incredibly strong rainstorm. And I mean, it's in Rio de Janeiro. So there's kind of this weather pattern where it's like, okay, it's sunny 1 minute. You kind of know day by day how it's going to turn out. Today, it just happened to be a really gorgeous day. It was super hot and he was just flying his kite and there was this hill that he was flying it over. It's called Vietnam Hill, and he stumbled across a scene that would ignite decades of speculation. He was an 18-year-old boy named Jorge da Costa Alves. Hopefully I pronounced that right. I tried my best. And this happened in 1966. There was this smell. It was pungent. And it's not something that you would expect to smell on a sunny day. I mean, maybe you would smell the fresh smell of grass, the clean air, especially just after the stretch of rain that they have gotten. Maybe the sense of dew, or from the nearby beach, maybe some salt from the ocean. But this wasn't that. Instead, there was a strong, unmistakable stench of thick rot that permeated the air. Jorge looked around for the source. He wouldn't stop until he found it. I don't know. Maybe it's like the feeling of the unknown. And like when you smell something that strong, you're like, damn, like what is that? Obviously, you're not expecting maybe the worst thing. You're like, okay, maybe it's a stink bug, or like there's like someone who needs help. Maybe, I don't know, it could be like an animal who like lost a leg and you need to help it. But when he saw two pairs of legs outstretched in the grass, at first he thought it was just two men taking a nap. But when he kept watching, there were bugs flying all over, and the smell was indescribable. What he was smelling was death. Their appearance was strikingly unusual. They were both dressed in formal business suits, over which they wore a waterproof raincoat, which was pretty weird given the warm weather and the lack of rainfall on that day. But most notably, each man wore a homemade mask that was crafted out of sheets of lead, which cover their eyes. When he first watched the bodies, there was no apparent sign of trauma that indicated a sign of struggle. Near the corpses, he noted there was an empty water bottle, a packet that contained 2 wet towels, and a small notebook. Instantly, he ran off to the police to go report. He just found some dead bodies. The police took a couple days to get there, and we'll get into it in a moment here when I get into the timeline of everything. But the police took a couple days to get there, and when they did, they noticed that the vegetation appeared to be deliberately cut with a sharp tool, which maybe could have been done by the guys, or it could have been done by someone after. But either way, there was a level of preparation in that location that was not typical for accidental death or chance encounters. Whatever happened was planned. And the wet towels, among the other personal effects, was also pretty noteworthy, as well as some notes that were found nearby. The 2 men were later identified as Manuel Piera da Cruz, who was 32, Miguel Jose Vana, who was 35. Both were electronic technicians who resided in Campos dos Juegos, a town that was located northeast of Rio de Janeiro. On August 17, 1966, was the last time they saw their families. They intended to travel to Sao Paulo to produce work materials, they said, and possibly purchase a vehicle. However, they deviated from this path and actually went to Niterói, a decision that was perhaps a concealed motive or an alteration to their initial plans. They journeyed by bus, arriving at approximately 2:30 p.m. And they were able to piece together where they went through witness testimonies and recovered evidence at the scene. Initially, they purchased some raincoats at a local store and mineral water. The waitress who served them recalled Miguel exhibiting signs of nervousness and frequently checking his wristwatch. Notably, they kept the receipt for the water bottle, implying that they had the intention to return the empty container for a refund. This was the last known sighting of Cruz and Viviana alive. Viviana, maybe like that. I'm trying to pronounce their names right. I'm really trying. But this wasn't the only thing that was suspicious regarding their kind of movements that day. Manuel had been carrying a significant amount of money on him, estimated at around a lot of Costa Rican dollars. Some sources corroborate that it's like 2.3 million Costa Rican dollars, or I don't know. Some people put in too many zeros. I don't know Costa Rica dollars, but it was a lot of money. It was found it wasn't found on their persons, which indicated a possible robbery or something. Either way, things got a little bit weird. And I'm going to go into breaking down the timeline of it because this case gets wild. And I really want us to have a clear timeline of events here. So it all started with an explosion. Sometime in June 1966, there was a homemade artifact that exploded in Manuel's home. And then everything else continued on August 17th. Manuel told his wife that him and Miguel would be going to Sao Paulo to buy a used car, like we said, and some electronic components for their shop. He got a large sum of money, and then he put in 2 towels with all the money. And some friends knew that they were going to Sao Paulo as well, not only his wife. And they asked Miguel and Manuel to bring them some things from Sao Paulo, which they also gave him more money. They went on the bus and they were intending to meet their friend El Kyo. I'm just gonna call him E. Their seat numbers were 25 and 26. But instead of going to Sao Paulo, they went to Niterói, which was another city. They went to an electronic shop and they had a conversation with Hernandi, who was the owner. He'd been with them 4 days before at Campos. At that occasion, Manuel showed Hernandi a magazine ad for an AM/FM frequency generator, which was valued at more than $1 million, their currency. And they asked for some components, but the store had none in stock. Hernandi thought this was a little bit weird because Miguel and Manuel were experienced technicians and would have known that these components would not normally be found in this city. But upon leaving, Manuel and Miguel invited Hernandi to go along with them to Sao Paulo so they could try finding the components there. But he declined, and in the shop, 2 other people also witnessed this conversation. So it's not just him. It was another employee and a taxi driver. The whole time they seemed to be quite rushed and in a hurry, and after that it started raining, so they went to go get raincoats. Although they didn't immediately wear the raincoats when they left the store, in the store testimonies say that both the men appeared to be calm, but there's 21 minutes that are unaccounted for at some time in this part, in between them leaving with the raincoats and getting to the next place where they got some mineral water. And it's reported that he looked agitated the next time he was seen. So they speculate that Miguel and Manuel must have encountered someone in between in that time. So they purchased a bottle of mineral water, right? And they got the receipt so they could get refund for the bottle. Miguel, the whole time, he's checking his watch. And at 4:30, they're expected to have arrived on the hill. Now, it's interesting to note that night, a woman and her 3 children were driving around the hill area when they saw some lights in the sky. This is where we get into some really weird shit. And they stopped to get out of the car and watch these lights for about 4 minutes. She describes them as bright oval orange, and they have like a ring of fire which emits blue rays of light in many directions, moving up and down the hill. She goes home and tells her husband. He goes to the location, but he doesn't see anything. They decide not to tell anyone until the bodies are eventually found. It's also interesting to note that this wasn't the only time their bodies were found. So, before the boy had found them, the kite guy, right? There was another boy who was hunting small animals on top of the hill when he had seen 2 men lying dead on the ground. He wasn't sure if they were sleeping or dead, so he quickly ran away, went home to a local policeman named Antonio, and he told him about the bodies. And he didn't say anything too much. He was like, yeah, it's fine. They're probably just napping. Don't worry about it. And he did nothing about it. So that was on I believe the 19th or the 18th. Somewhere around there. On the 20th, their bodies are found. So later that afternoon, he tells the police, but the police decide to do nothing about it because it's getting late and there's also some bad weather. So they decide not to climb the hill that afternoon. On the 21st is the day the police reach the bodies, and they find exactly what had been described. They're dressed in identical formal suits, wearing raincoats, and they're easily identified because they have their personal documents on them, which is a little bit weird. There's signs of blood that that were apparent on their mouth and their nose, and they were lying on their back in some kind of palm leaf tree. So like they made like a bed out of palm leaves, or whoever put their bodies there. I don't know. It gets weird. And there's signs of blood on the leaves. This is the kind of palm leaf that can only be cut with a knife, but none are found at the scene. On the scene of the crime, the men find these items: a bottle of mineral water, almost empty, improvised cups made of aluminum foil, a package of 2 towels, a wedding ring tied to a reading glass inside Manuel's jacket, a wristwatch stored inside the pocket of Miguel's pants. They found some money inside a plastic bag hidden in Miguel's pants. It was about 157,000, I believe, dollars in their currency, Costa Rican dollars. And there was 40,000 hidden inside Manuel's jacket. There was a folded, unused handkerchief with the embroidered initials AMS. The receipt for the water bottle, matches, and cigarettes inside Miguel's pocket. 2 unused bus tickets from Niterói to Campos. Interestingly, not Sao Paulo, or wherever they were trying to go. Square pieces of cellophane paper impregnated with some kind of substance. A newspaper from August 17th. 2 masks beside the bodies. Crudely made masks shaped like sunglasses, but they're made of pure lead and have no eye holes. A handwritten paper with some electronic equations. Another handwritten paper with letters and numbers and some kind of a code. Another handwritten paper with instructions found inside Miguel's pocket. And to top it off, another handwritten paper with some medicine recipes. And then finally, a dirty notepaper with the word bonsai. This is a Japanese word, by the way, I think. And this is just me. Bonsai is kind of like a battle cry. It really kind of means, the technical term is 10,000 years, which is kind of used to express joy or triumph, but it's a shortened version of the traditional phrase Tennō Hiaka Banzai, which translates to long live His Majesty the Emperor. So it's kind of like a little battle phrase, interestingly. So the bodies are taken to the coroner's office later that day, which is very busy. And it's interesting because everyone is pushing to get these bodies done, and they're pressuring for the coroner to release the body eventually. But the coroner is absent, and contrary to protocols, an assistant takes care of Miguel and Manuel and performs the preparation for the autopsy himself, the removal of the internal organs. And he reported that there was no signs of violence or injury found on the bodies. So the autopsy is performed, and it's determined that the internal organs are too decomposed during those 2 days for reliable testing. Miguel and Manuel are buried at Caju Cemetery in Campos. A reporter goes to the coroner's office in Niterói and learns that the organs of Miguel and Manuel were simply discarded without any tests being performed on them, actually. Apparently, the organs had been sitting on the shelf for all those days and became too deteriorated to be of any use. Besides, the office lacked the proper regiments to perform all the tests, so they just threw them out and into the garbage, actually.
What?
Yeah. The case of Miguel and Manuel makes the news, and that's when the wife and her husband tell about the lights that they saw over the hill that night. There are also other people that call the police with similar stories to that. So that all happens within like a couple of weeks. August 27th of 1966, the federal police are brought into the case and start investigating in the 4 states of Rio de Janeiro, Guadalajara, Santo, and Sao Paulo. The Army, Navy, and Air Force Secret Service are also investigating this case and want to know if the alleged experiment, so the explosion, right, that happened on the beach when this first started happening, was of any importance to the case. So their friend E is arrested and brought to Niterói for an interrogation. August 31st of 1966, investigators at Campos searched the house of Estavos Fidelis de Morales, who was contacted by Miguel just before the explosion at the beach. Remember when this first started happening in June. They find that there's an antenna, but the transmitter that they had been excitedly talking about was sold. And we'll get into this in a little bit. They had no registered ham operators in the area yet, but the Navy intercepted a few transitions between the prefixes of CKJ21, CKJ22, and CKJ23 in the area 2 days before the explosion. Unknown to E, a lawyer enters to set him free, and the police comply with the orders. So E is set free. He also presents an alibi for the afternoon of August 17th, where he shows a receipt from an audio store in Campos, nearly 400 kilometers away from Niterói, where Miguel and Manuel died. Later that day, at the presumed time of death, he was later seen by his neighbors in the front of his house working on his car. So he's good. He's clear. He had nothing to do with it, allegedly. In September 1966, around 1 month after the bodies were released, while browsing Miguel's shop, an investigator finds a paper note that had been found with the bodies that was cut from a notebook at his house. He later returns to the coroner's office at Niterói to get the death certificates that were signed by the doctor. It's stated that due to the advanced decomposition, it is not possible to attest the cause of death. It is found in the first autopsy report a serious error. The name of the specialist was erased and replaced with another name, Walmore Gianni, and it's speculated that the first doctor did not agree with the report, so he requested to have his name removed from it. So there's maybe a bit of a cover-up happening. They exhumed the bodies, and the initial doctor, who didn't want to be associated with the first report, is assigned to the job. He finds that the bodies received an excess of formaldehyde, and because of that, it's not possible to perform a proper toxology report, and because of that, the cause of death will remain unknown. So E testified, contrary to what Miguel and Manuel said, we're going to get into it, about the explosion. He said that they were the masterminds, and he just kind of went along with their invitation to watch the explosion happen at the beach. In his first testimony, he said they went from Arafanga in Miguel's car, and later on he changed it, saying Miguel's car was broken, so they went in his own car. Curious. Vladimir, who worked for Miguel and Manuel, says E lied to them about the experiment. According to him, E invited the three of them, Miguel, Manuel, and himself, to watch something supernatural down at the beach. But he did not disclose the details in advance. He said that the trip from Campos to the beach that night lasted less than an hour, 40 kilometers. He said that E went to the beach and the three men waited for 10 minutes. Then E came running back, and they saw a huge red-purple light come down towards the water. E urged them to enter the car and get away, because there was something bad about to happen. Vladimir remembers a strong smell of sulfur in the air, and he did not hear about any explosion at the time. Both Miguel and Manuel often came to E to seek help from the spiritual world. Miguel was asthmatic, and Manuel suffered from chronic diarrhea. Oof. According to Vladimir, E always gave good advice. The four friends, Miguel, Manuel, Vladimir, and E, used to gather at the shop for long spiritual sessions. Manuel and E were a bit more enthusiastic about the group, where Manuel was at first a little skeptic. The days before August 17th, Manuel is quoted as saying, "I'm going to watch an experiment. After that, I'm going to be able to tell you whether I believe it or not," allegedly. Police found that Miguel and Manuel performed other experiments in the cities of Masai, Campos, and Niterói, all in the state of Rio de Janeiro. And cheesy Pete, I can't pronounce that. So just put it up. And the military wanted to know if these experiments could have posed any threat to national security. Manuel's wife confirmed that Manuel participated in the beach experiment. She also confirmed that the lead masks were made by Miguel and Manuel the day before they traveled to Niterói. It seemed that they used a lead pipe as source for the material. In a bucket at Manuel's house, police found a cutout that matched the lead of the holes on the mask over the nose. At the time, Manuel explained to his wife that they needed the masks for work. At the shop, the police also found more lead masks. They also found a note with the instructions, which was Miguel's handwriting. But the terms like capsules are not believed to be part of his day-to-day vocabulary. And we'll get into what these capsules mean in a moment. The assumption is that some medical doctor dictated him to write these notes. The Engineering Institute of the Army stated that the masks did not contain any reactive material, and lots of people speculated that this was due to like a nuclear explosion that would have happened, but there's no radiation that was detected in these masks. The analysis was requested by the police because they didn't know the nature of the experiment that was performed on that day on the beach. People, including myself, don't suspect a lot of this hypothesis that's coming up, but some people theorize that there was a suicide pact. But there's also many contributing factors that make me kind of be like, I don't believe this, which is because there's missing money and they had the water bottle refund for the receipt. So, like, why is there missing money? Where did the money go? There would have been no time in between then and there to lose that much money. And why would they ask for a refund if they weren't going to come back and get it? One line of investigation is also looking at espionage regarding their usage of radio transmissions. And it's interesting to note they were electronic technicians with the right expertise. They found codes with them. The hilltop was remote and isolated, which made it a good place for radio transmissions. Another line of investigation focuses on contraband. The newspaper from August 17th, found on the scene, had a story of a group of smugglers that was partially dismantled. 5 of the smugglers were identified, but 2 more still remained at loose, according to the papers. The police learned of a story on August 17th from a woman who said around 5 p.m. she had seen a Jeep with 5 men approaching her street. The men had parked their car and started climbing up the hill. The story was told to the police, and they said it was very strange because already at the time, the hill was starting to get dark and it was muddy, right? So muddy and raining. So it's not really that safe. Interesting to note, later on, so this is a couple years after, they exhumed the corpse again. And in 1968, the bones and tissue that were collected are sent to an Institute of Atomic Energy in Sao Paulo as a last measure to try to identify the cause of death. The result of the analysis was apparently lost in the mail. Highly suspicious, which delayed the investigation for a couple of weeks. And when the package arrived in Niterói, the technical police were baffled. They couldn't make heads or tails of the result. With the help of the technicians from the Atomic Institute, they determined that all elements were normal. And again, in September of 1968, a photographer captured the image of an unidentified flying object over the very same hill. The object stayed still for a few minutes, then went away at great speed. He said that the object emitted a silver light so intense he had to use a yellow filter on the camera. Many other people in Niterói say they saw the same object. On September of 1969, a man named Hamilton, a confessed criminal sentenced for 50 years for other crimes, admitted to a judge he knew the fate of Miguel and Manuel. He said on August 1966 he was invited by 3 burglars to participate in a job. They all met at the spiritual center in Niterói, where Miguel and Manuel, the victims, already awaited. Hamilton drove the 3 men and the 2 victims around town until one of the men asked him to stop. Hamilton waited in the car, and several minutes later, 3 men returned without Miguel and Manuel. He told Hamilton that they had forced the victims to ingest poison, got their money. Hamilton is brought to Niterói for interrogation, but the number of contradictions in his story, the police quickly determined he was lying. Hamilton's real intention was to leave the prison and try to escape while in Niterói. He's sent back to Sao Paulo and sued for false testimony. The initials on the handkerchief, right? Do you remember that? AMS?
Yes.
Was found to match someone named Ramanhana. We're going to go with that. R. In Recleve, which was a capital city in northeast Brazil. While there, he pretended to be a professor in parapsychology. So the story goes that he escaped police siege by hiding inside a refrigerator, and then he escaped to another state. Because of this new development, police were considering to reopen the lead masks case, but only and if he was arrested. The story gets a little confusing from here, since There are some reports that he was found in Rio de Janeiro or in Fortaleza in April of the same year. Irregardless, he was found, and there are reports of him saying that any and all attempts to arrest him would be futile since he would use his magical powers to hypnotize any agents who came after him. But in 1972, he was able to escape the prison before the transfer. But in the next year, his magical powers must have failed him since he was captured in April of 1973. This time, he was brought to Niterói. Unfortunately, 6 years later, they never were able to reopen the case after his arrest. So they didn't really find anything. Back to the UFO phenomenon. In 1980, on April, Jacques, an academic who had worked for NASA and a leading expert in UFO phenomenon, comes to Brazil to investigate the case. He climbs the hill and talks to police detectives and reporters that covered the case, and he noted the spot where the bodies were found was barren. Grass hadn't grown since. So that's the timeline of the case. So remember the autopsy, right? The mishandled one? There was a significant decomposition of their internal organs, which they can be tested though for, right? Consequently, their initial toxology analysis was unable to detect the presence of harmful substances. So later on, they exhumed and conducted for specific toxins like arsenic, mercury, barnum, and thallium, and these test results yield negative results. It wasn't able to rule out a wide range of other potential toxic substances or drugs, to be noted. Some sources say that the official cause of death was ultimately recorded as heart attacks. That's so fucking weird, though. Like, someone cut down these leaves, put these bodies on their backs. They were wearing their masks, their suits, these ponchos, and then they just died of heart attacks from that.
Yeah, and like both of them.
At the same time. So, I mean, an initial toxology request might have shed light on the cause of death, but due to the incomplete nature, we might never, or we probably will never know what actually happened due to them dying. So, one of the most prominent theories attempting to explain the death of Manuel and Miguel was that they were involved in a group known as the scientific spiritualists that we were talking about a little bit, right? This theory poses that the two men were actively engaged in attempts to contact extraterrestrial beings or spirits. It's believed that they were employed with psychedelic drugs to help facilitate these counters that would have led them to believe that such interactions would have been accompanied by bright light, hence them needing their masks, right? The theory concludes that they ultimately succumbed to the overdose of these drugs, and the supporting theory is the cryptic note that was found at the scene of the crime, which indicated instructions about ingesting capsules and of waiting to use the signals for the masks. Furthermore, investigators discovered that there was mask-making materials and literatures pertaining to spiritualism at their residence. So, back to the beach experiment. They went to this tourist point in Sao Jose del Barra, next to Campos. At 9 p.m., there was a huge explosion that lit up the sky. There was a huge ball of fire, and it was heard from 10 kilometers away. Witnesses say they felt the ground shaking in the surroundings, where nearby houses suffered minor damages. It caused panic. The rumor at the time was that a flying saucer went down into the ocean. A local says that he saw a lighted ship in the distance, and then all of a sudden, it was gone. The explosion drew attention from the Navy, which later started an investigation, which we kind of talked about a little bit already. So, police obviously heard this, and they went out to um, the beach after they felt their whole building shake. And on the beach, they smelled a strong sulfur coming from the track on the sand. And it looked like tire marks. So he reported this to his superiors. After some time after the explosion, Miguel contacted someone via the ham radio, which was some 300 miles away from the beach, which is just interesting to note. There's a whole bunch of shit that probably happened, which we might never know about. While the scientific spiritualist theory offers an interesting story that kind of aligns with some of the unusual aspects of the case. There are other possible explanations that have been proposed. Obviously, we can't rule out the possibility of foul play. The missing sum of money that Manuel was initially carrying suggests robbery as a motive. However, there was no sign of a struggle, and it seems very weird that they would stage the bodies in that kind of way. Another possible avenue to explain this is there was also foul play involving the idea of poisoning. So, regarding the cryptic notes that were found, the instructions read 4:30 to be on the hill, 6:30 ingest capsules after the effect, and then comma protect metals, await for signal mask. The instructions lacked punctuation and the intended effect is ambiguous. The second line could read ingested capsules after effect or ingest capsules after the effect. Like it's all kind of one word. There's no punctuation. It's hard to tell what's going on. The third line could read protect metals, wait for the signal, use mask, right? Or it could also read protect metals, like protect these metals that you're wearing, wait for the signal from the mask. The fact the wedding ring and the wristwatch were also found inside their clothes could have related to the protect metals. And it's also just like really weird that a robber wouldn't steal like a wedding ring and a watch, right? So there was other notes, right? So one paper note reads Monday 1 capsule in the morning while fasting. Tuesday 1 capsule after meal. Wednesday 1 capsule when lying down. A third note reads buy a 500-meter long thread roll. There was also a silver blue paper with equation of Ohm's law. Ohm's law is basically like for their electrician thing, where it states that the electric current comes through a conductor between 2 points and it's directly proportional to the voltage across 2 points. It's basically just like a mathematical equation that introduces the resistance and voltage of an electric current, and it's just a way of measuring it. The note in reference to the two capsules could suggest that the men intentionally were poisoned, perhaps misled about the nature of the substance they were ingesting. The lead masks in this scenario might have been intended as a form of protection against a perceived danger such as radiation, which is why everyone was like, yo, you better get that tested, as if they were deceived into believing they were being involved in like something hazardous. And I mean, like, if I was about to meet an alien too, I would probably be like, yo, I better like suit up. They probably got like some weird disease, radiation, something. So I mean, I can get down with that maybe a little bit. Like it could have been a con man too, like a third party possibly connected to their spiritual group, someone they encountered in Niterói. Remember that 21 minutes that was unaccounted for? It could have been responsible for their deaths as well. An accidental death scenario is also a consideration. Even if Miguel and Manuel were intentionally using psychedelic drugs for spiritual purposes, the possibility of the accidental overdose is still an explanation. While they were wearing suits, the added layer of raincoats may suggest that they anticipated being exposed to the elements for a long time, and the prolonged exposure potentially exacerbated their drug usage, and that might have contributed to their deaths. This seems less likely given their attire, though. Like it just seems like they were more prepared than what was going on, and they also had water too. So I don't know. And like I said, there's people who saw an oval shaped thing the night that guys died. The area is rumored to be a hotspot for UFO sightings. Some theories propose that they were attempting to make contact with them, and the lead masks were speculated to be protection against radiation, like I mentioned, or the intense light emanating from the spacecraft. It's important to note, though, the lead masks case was not an isolated incident in Brazil during this period. In 1962, 4 years prior to the death of Manuel and Miguel, a similar case occurred in the same general area involving a man named Hermes. He was found dead with a lead mask covering his face. Investigations into his death reportedly revealed he was attempting to use psychic abilities to receive radio signals without the use of electronic equipment. Interesting. The similarities between the two cases involving the lead masks, the proximity of the location, and the profession of the victims, both of them were involved in electronics, is really fucking weird. In the shop where the guy lived, they found a book called Viva no Planetara Marte, which is Life on the Planet Mars. It was filled with written notes, and it prefaced that the author of the book said that the text was dictated to him by a spiritual entity named Ramatis. This book informs us that Mars is an inhabited planet, and it describes a great deal many aspects of the Martian civilization, family, education, culture, religion, entertainment, technology, industry, transport, government, among so much more. There's a chapter called Airships, Spaceships, and Flying Saucers that talks about Martian spaceship technology, and another one is called Interplanetary Voyages. The chapter Reincarnation explains that the spirit of a human dies on Earth to be reincarnated as a Martian, but native Martians can tell if they're a native or a foreign person, i.e., like a human that died. Really interesting book. Investigations concluded that Manuel and Miguel had no connection to Hermes, suggesting that the similarities might have been coincidental or indicative of a broader, perhaps localized, an interest in conventional practices at the time. Reoccurrence of the lead masks and unexplained deaths in the same region is really fucking weird. And the fact that they're both electronic technicians might be like, okay, like maybe electronic technicians, maybe not like every single one, but like maybe it's just like they're maybe predisposed to like wanting to experiment or like believe in things. I don't know. So yeah, that's just a couple of the theories. Like, the theories in this case go really hard. And further to go on about the capsules, it's suggested that the ingestion of the capsules was expected to produce some kind of effect that would necessitate the protection of their eye gear. One interpretation is that the raincoats they purchased were also meant to protect them, possibly from the reaction of the capsules. I It's so weird. Everyone's just kind of guessing and trying to figure out what happened. Another possibility is they also had some kind of electronic equipment with them, even though there was nothing found at the scene. Maybe like someone came by and stole it. I don't know. I feel like if you saw a dead body, you would have reported it though. But there was also missing money, right? So maybe whoever took the money would take this electronic equipment, but not take the watches and the wedding ring.
But it's also like super sketchy that the police didn't go immediately. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, like the lack of kind of caring as far as the police goes on this case is just weird. And then for the army and literally everyone else to be involved like later on is crazy. Some sources also note that the grammar in the note is somewhat nonsensical, and it was kind of written by, some people say, it was written by someone who was under the influence of like a substance or not entirely fluent in the language, even though it's like his handwriting. Despite over a century, the lead masks case officially remains unsolved. There are no definitive answers in this case that fully explain the bizarre circumstances regarding the death of Manuel and Miguel. There's no official reopenings of the case or significant new pieces of evidence that have come to light since the initial investigation in 1966. Nonetheless, the case continues to generate interest and speculation. There's so many documentaries, podcasts, articles, and online forums just dedicated to unraveling this mystery. Like, this is truly just like the tip of the iceberg I'm able to talk about. It goes so much more deeper. Yeah, there's just so much unexplained shit that happens, and the lack of conclusive resolution after so many years is mind-boggling. Like, at some point, it feels like maybe we would have found someone who was like, yeah, no, I killed them, it's fine. Or like blood on someone's hands. I don't know. But it remains a compelling and enduring enigma. There's two key facts to this case. There's two electronic technicians who were found dead in unusual attire, wearing lead masks, with a cryptic note detailing the sequence time of their actions. And then there's the second part, which is a whole bunch of theories. So, I don't know. Yeah. Let us know what you think down in the comments. Do you think it was an accidental overdose, robbery, UFOs? There's so many questions left unanswered in this case. And yeah, even now, people are still trying to put something together that kind of makes a solution, but it's so wild. There was this one time, there was this man who stepped forward in the customs area to the custom officials. He was pretty smartly dressed. He's Caucasian, or at least he looked Caucasian, and he had a neatly trimmed beard. At first glance, he seemed just like any other man going to Japan. But as he presented his passport to the customs officer, something strange really occurred. The document was crisp and authentic. However, there was something very strange. It stated his nationality as Torrid. What's the problem there? Well, there's no country named Torrid, not on any map or an atlas or an official registry known to authorities. Who was this man and what happens next? This is the story of the Torrid man. Like I said, the man was Caucasian with a beard. He presented his passport to the customs officials at Haneda Airport. He seemed to have this air about him, like he traveled a lot. This was just another routine business trip. He confidently claimed to the officials that this was his third visit to Japan. His primary language was French. However, he spoke Japanese and several other languages, which seemingly added to this international traveler profile that was starting to come about here. But the moment the officials looked at the passport, there was an immediate and significant red flag. While there was multiple stamps, including Japanese ones, in the passport, the country of issue was Torrid. And immediately, this is very strange because there's no country on the map as Torrid. However, this man insisted it was real. He repeated the emphasis that this had been used a lot and why is he being held up. It seemingly was obvious forgery, but the guy claimed it was legitimate, despite the impossible country that has never existed before. So, to resolve this kind of confusion, officials presented the man with a large world map. Without hesitation, he immediately pointed to the area occupied by the Principality of Andorra. It's a small, very real country nestled high in the Pyrenees between France and Spain. But however, when he was informed that this area is Andorra, he became confused, even irritated. He had never heard of Andorra, and he went on to say his country had been in existence for 1,000 years. He was specific, he was confident, and he was annoyed at their confusion. But the officials buckled down and said, well, I don't see Torrid on the map right here where Andorra is. Do you? He continued to get even more mad, but something just wasn't quite right. The man continued to provide further details about his alleged business trip, the company he worked for, the hotel that he claimed to have a reservation to, and even officials in Tokyo who he was supposed to be meeting. He even carried currencies of various different countries, suggesting an extensive travel routine. So the authorities followed up, and there was dead ends no matter where they looked. The company that he mentioned did exist in Tokyo, but they had no record of this man. The hotel that he said he had a reservation at did exist, but the employees confirmed no such booking was made. Even the bank he claimed to work with didn't exist anywhere. With his story unraveling before him, and with the officials coming back and saying, hey, you lied to us. Why are you lying? They were pretty suspicious that he was some kind of criminal, maybe even a spy. So they decided to detain him. He was taken to a nearby multi-story hotel and placed in a room. And this is really important. This room was high up with no balcony. There was only one entry and exit point, and two guards were placed at his door. Remember this because it's important for later. His documents and personal belongings were confiscated for further examination. However, this is where it gets truly strange. The next morning, when officers returned to continue their questioning, they found the room empty. The man was gone. He just simply vanished. The guards who had been stationed outside all night swore he never came to the door. The windows were sealed shut. And from a high floor with no balcony, escape seemed utterly impossible. So this has kind of lingered on for a long time as far as the discourse and everything. But I just want to add one more final thing. So he disappeared, and all his personal documents disappeared with him, including his unique passport and everything that he had, all the money, everything. No one ever saw this man again. They tried searching for him, but he had disappeared in the same air that his country existed in.
Did he have currency that was like from his country?
One source said that there was money from Torrid as well as traveler's checks.
That's so weird. Did he say he flew from Torrid?
No, he was like on this international flight bender.
Okay, that's interesting though.
So the story of the Torrid man seemed insane, crazy, and the internet and everyone ran wild with it. This happened, I believe, back in the 1950s. So was the internet around? No. But is the internet around now? Yes. So a lot of theories still exist today. One of the most popular and compelling theories is that he was from a parallel universe or a multiverse traveler, saying that the man accidentally slipped through the seams of his universe and landed in ours by mistake. His parallel Earth said that Torrid exists exactly where Andorra is on our maps, and he was simply telling the truth from his side. Then his disappearance is just the universe correcting itself and putting him back in his original dimension. Another intriguing possibility that came up is that he was a time traveler. Perhaps he journeyed from a future where Torrid was a recognized nation, or the past where the maps were very different. Then he got stuck here, then unstuck, and just returned to his own time. Weird to say because it seems like he's, I don't know, traveled around a lot. And why would he suddenly choose here and now to just like poop?
Yeah.
More grounded theories do exist, though, saying that maybe he was just delusional and he suffered from a severe mental condition like DID or schizophrenia, because he had unwavering confidence in the fact that, no, this is where my country exists. And, just like to do with him, he seemed so put together. So it could be that maybe his passport was forged or altered, and he just had a deeply held delusion about this country. However, it doesn't explain how he was able to vanish from a room unless someone let him out. Some people say that the incident was real, but the authorities orchestrated a government cover-up. Some parts of this theory say that officials knew something truly inexplainable had occurred, but he wasn't the first in such cases. Or that maybe he really was from Andorra, but the government put a random fake country on his passport and detained him, and he was never seen again. Maybe that could have been something. Or the whole thing could have been a hoax. This perspective exists because there's no official record of this event, not from the Japanese government, not from the airport, and not from news or archives. Most references to the story appear in paranormal books or internet forums long after 1954 when this occurred. Often, you will find it on Reddit as a copy pasta with very little information. It could be exactly like we're doing right now, telling you a story on a podcast. Or it could just be the retelling of someone's really, really solid dream that they had, that they said, oh no, when I got off the plane, there was this guy and he was just so crazy saying he was from this country. I can't believe it. And it just continues snowballing from there into something even more crazy. I don't know. Was it a glitch in the matrix or was something covered up here? For decades, the primary evidence from the man from Torrid was just being retold in paranormal books and internet forums. But a lot of internet warriors went through an investigation saying that they were not able to find any evidence that corroborates the story from the airport or the newspapers, so on and so forth. For me, it just seems like when there's no official statement, and this is an international incident involving this disappearance of a person from police custody, for me, what this seems like is that maybe there's a bit of a cover-up going on here. Maybe there's a bit of a high-telling story. Who knows? It could be inspired by a very real figure of John Allen Kuchar, who was indeed arrested in Japan. He was 36 years old and he had entered Japan with his Korean wife. He was arrested for 3 months by the police for identity fraud after he attempted to cash forged checks at the Chase Manhattan Bank and the Bank of Korea in Tokyo. His passport, while containing stamps of Japanese embassies in different Asian countries, was ultimately determined to be counterfeit and its seals fabricated. He had invented a nation, a capital, a people, a language for his self-made passport. The country on his passport was Taurid or Tured, with its capital reading Tamaracient. He claimed that it was a state of 2 million somewhere in the south of the Sahara, extending from Mediterranean to Sudan. This was very different from Torrid and Andorra to being in the Sahara, but the name Torrid from the urban legend could be a misspelling of Tuareg, which is spelled Tuareg, just so you know, referencing to this alleged country. Tamaracient was a real province in Algeria. However, he was making outlandish claims about his background, saying that he was born in the US, he moved to the UK, and he was a pilot of the Royal Air Force, a spy for the Americans in South Korea, and he had worked for the United Arab Republic. All of these claims were not true, and he also said that he spoke 14 countries, so love that for him. Despite the vanishing act of the legend, John did not disappear. He was sentenced to a year in prison for illegal entry and passing phony checks. After his release, he was deported from Japan to Hong Kong, while his wife was deported to South Korea. He even tried to commit suicide in front of the judge during his trial. The transformation of his story, a case of identity fraud and forgery, into an interdimensional mystery could be a very strong possibility into the whole mystery of the Torrid man. There was no necessary proof of existence of a man, but, he did disappear from the public eye. It could be that someone was telling the story of how this man committed fraud, but it was embellished to get even more crazy each time it was told. So it evolved into this great mystery. John was arrested in 1959 to 1960, and the legend started in 1954. And it could be that, despite the invented country being in the South Sahara, they could have just said, no, it's somewhere between Spain and France. I don't really know where it is. But yeah, it could be just this telephone game that was happening. So the journey of the Torrid man takes us from a crazy airport encounter to maybe a skilled con man. What seems an impossible mystery fueled by a passport from a non-existent country to a disappearance could be just the result of telling a wrong story. Not necessarily a glitch in the matrix or interdimensional time travel. It could be that we are just saying the story wrong. On December 1st, 1948, the discovery of a man's body on Somerton Park Beach in Adelaide, South Australia, set in motion one of perhaps the most profounding and enduring mysteries in modern criminal history. The scene itself was immediately puzzling. The man was found slumped against a sea wall. He was dressed in a fashionable suit and tie, with his legs extended and his feet crossed. He had a half-smoked, unlit cigar resting upon his shoulder. The meticulous presentation of his body, coupled with the absence of any sign of struggle or violence, led initial investigators to theorize the man may have died in his sleep, as you do, falling asleep on a beach in seemingly the middle of nowhere with no one around. Today, we're going to be talking about the Somerton Man case. Hi, and welcome to the Decomposing Flower. I'm Kira, and with me is Jen. Everything we say is hopefully as truthful as we can get. We do try to say everything truthfully, but if we get anything wrong, you can let us know. Always start a discussion down in the comments. We love to hear about it. Today, we're going to be discussing the Somerton Man case. Let's get into it. So the man appeared to be of British descent. He was later described pathologist named John Cleland to be in top physical condition. He was estimated to be between 40 and 45 years old. He stood at 5 feet 11 inches. He had fair to ginger-colored hair. He had broad shoulders and a narrow waist. Closer examination of his hands and nails revealed that they were clean and well kept. They showed no sign of manual labor, which led Cleland to classify him as being an office worker of some sort, maybe. They made a portrait of the man, but it was so weird that this seemingly well-kept man lay dead on a public beach without a name, without a story. He seemingly was in a healthy physical state, but why was his body left out there? Two specific anatomical details were later identified that would become central to the surrounding mystery of the case. The man's calf muscles were unusually high and well developed, and that his big and little toe met in a wedge shape. An expert at the inquest speculated that these traits were unique of a ballet dancer or someone who wore high-heeled boots. This unique set of physical attributes, combined with his unexplained death, served as a foundational element for lots and lots of theories about his identity and his profession that we will get into today. The man's pockets held several items, none of which offered any clues to who he was. They contained a unused second-class rail ticket from Adelaide to Henley Beach, a bus ticket, a narrow American-made comb, half an empty packet of chewing gum, an Army Club cigarette packet with 7 cigarettes inside, a different brand from cigarette that was on his shoulder, and a box of matches. The most perplexing thing was Mans didn't have any money, he didn't have a wallet, he didn't have any ID, which led investigators to believe that these items had been removed. Early witnesses did describe this man. They saw him around the beach at 7 p.m. November 30th, 1948, and observed him extend his right arm fully, then drop it limply. Another couple saw him between 7:30 and 8 p.m. and noted he remained motionless for over half an hour. Through his position, he appeared to shift slightly, but not like doing jumping jacks or playing around on the beach. He was just standing there. So the case remained cold for a little bit before they found 2 clues that became important to the investigation. These were a small note which turned his death into potential ties into espionage. The first major breakthrough occurred on June 6, 1949, when police re-examined the trousers. They were able to find a small hidden pocket that had been overlooked. Inside this compartment, there was a tiny scrap of paper with 2 words printed on it, Taman Shud. This is a Persian phrase that translates to "it is ended" or "it is finished." This cryptic note led authorities to conclude that something was very strange about this body. You know, just like not to be expected when you find a body on the beach, I guess. Forensics quickly determined that this paper had been torn from the very last page of a rare edition of a 12th century poetry book. Yeah, I'm gonna mess this up though. Rabidat of Omar Khayyam. So eventually they were trying to find this book And a man who went by an alias of Ron Francis eventually came forward in July 22nd of the following year and reported that his brother-in-law had found a copy of it in his unlocked car, which had been parked in Jeffrey Road in Glen Lake near the crime scene a couple months earlier. They were able to analyze that this was indeed the correct book and it matched the fragment found in the man's pocket, which created a powerful link between the two. On the inside back cover, faint indentations of previous writings were noticed by an investigating officer. When they traced this, it revealed a local phone number and a series of cryptid letters. The phone number was traced back to a nurse named Jessica Jenston Thomason, who lived a 5-minute walk from where the body was found. The letters, which resembled a 5-line coded message, was sent to Naval Intelligence, and they deemed it unbreakable. For decades, they thought that this was a Cold War espionage theory, but it was so weird that there was also like a local woman who was involved. Things were just not making sense. But later on, they were able to find a brown suitcase, which had been left uncollected at Adelaide Railway Station. Police were able to connect the luggage to the deceased man through a unique reel of orange wax thread inside it, which was identical to the thread used to repair the lining of the man's trousers. The contents of the suitcase were interesting as well. There was a dressing gown, slippers, pajamas, suggesting that Home Dog was going to stay overnight somewhere. It also included an electrician's screwdriver, a table knife, which had been modified very sharply, and sharpened scissors. The most perplexing detail, however, was the removal of pretty much all the clothing labels, reinforcing the idea that he was trying to hide his identity. But there was also the presence of a name T. Kine on a tie and a laundry bag. So, going back to the body, the autopsy, they were able to find that the man's heart was normal. However, there was a significant congestion in his internal organs, namely the brain, liver, and spleen. The most striking observation was that his spleen was very large and firm, about 3 times the size of a normal spleen. They also found blood mixed in with his stomach, but there was also a pastry that he had eaten probably about 3 to 4 hours before he had died. They did a toxicity test on his blood, but there was a failure to reveal any foreign substances. So they were at a loss for how he actually died. They thought initially it would be poison, but with not finding anything in his blood or anything, they were at a loss. There was the possibility that these very rare, highly toxic drugs may have decomposed very early after death, but it was so weird that this would have been used on a regular Joe Schmo, seemingly. Let's get into the theories. We'll circle back. Remember Jessica, the phone number, the back of the book, right? So obviously the police investigated this lead. She was a nurse. She lived close to the beach. She was a bit evasive. When police showed her a plaster case of the man's deceased face, she reacted with profound shock and appeared to be completely taken aback to the point where she was about to faint. Despite this kind of recognition, she firmly denied knowing him and refused to look at him a second time. Maybe it was that he died of a broken heart or a scandalous affair and it was suicide, or that he chose to end it all. I mean, it kind of makes sense with like the whole paper saying it is ended. Maybe he was being dramatic and that was why she had an emotional reaction. Or maybe he was a spurned lover that chose to end his life and leaves the police constantly knocking on her door. And that would have hurt her reputation as well, right? Maybe it was that. But it was so weird that they couldn't figure out how he died. So circling back to espionage, this happened post World War II in like the early stages of the Cold War. There was a lot of ideas of espionage floating around. Everyone was scared of ran with this. The evidence around the whole case kind of supported this as well, especially with the seemingly unbreakable coded message found on the back of the book. And the untraceable poison? Perhaps. This is also very similar to another case, the death of Joseph Marshall, who was also found with a copy of the same book on his checks. Two theories was one of personal tragedy and one was that he was a international super spy. So it had been about 7 decades before anything happened on this case. Things remained cold. There was no leads after the first initial go of it. But now with today's technology, we're able to do genetic testing on it. They were able to take some of the hairs from his face that was put in the plaster, and they were able to match the DNA to a distant cousin of the Somerton man. They constructed a family tree that grew to approximately 4,000 people, leading them to make a potential match. Charles Webb, who is an electrical engineer and instrument maker from Melbourne, who had no record of his death. The identification of Hara Webb as the Somerton man, while wasn't official, it was confirmed by the Australian police that it was circumstantial and it might have been him, but there were still things that didn't quite add up. The presence of T. Keen on the suitcase clothing suggested that Webb had a brother-in-law named Thomas Keen or something, suggesting that the clothes were hand-me-downs maybe, and that's why the name was there. But records show that Webb had separated from his wife, who had moved away from Australia in 1948, which possibly could have been a motive for him being in the area. Furthermore, his background aligned with the evidence of the book. His divorce papers revealed that he was fond of writing poetry, and he was described as being a moody, violent man with a few friends. He often wrote poems about death, and this whole poetry correlates with the book and the themes of fate and self-exiting, and it could have been a whole spurned lover situation again. The case of the Somerton man is still ongoing. For 73 years, it's captivated the world, and it leaves a man with no official identity, a mysterious note, an unbreakable code, and an unexplained death. It could be that it was Charles Webb. There's so many questions that remain unanswered, and I wish I had an answer for you because I always hate leaving these with open-ended questions. But there's, just an unsolved mystery that we might never know.
You know, when you're at a club or maybe you're at a concert and everybody is just dancing and having a lot of fun, so you feel like you can dance because, of course, nobody's gonna think you're weird if you start dancing. Or maybe you're not the one dancing and everyone else is dancing, and now you feel like you are the odd one out because you're like, oh my God, I'm not dancing. I should probably start dancing. It's kind of like you're conforming to the world around you. You're like, I gotta start dancing. Or maybe it's a song you need to sing and you're just all having fun. That is something we're going to be talking about today. In July of 1518, there was this woman. Her name was Frau Tofia. I don't even know if I'm saying her name right. She was from France, so I'm so sorry if I'm saying her name wrong. But she would step onto the cobble streets right outside her house and she would just begin to dance. Eventually, people started to notice this and they thought it was weird. But then suddenly, more and more people started to dance, but they didn't really want to dance. They were wanting it to stop. It was literally like they caught the dancing plague. And that is what we're going to be talking about today. So, like I said, in July, there was this woman and she began to dance. She would actually dance until she would collapse from exhaustion, and then she'd kind of rest up and she'd begin dancing again. Within a week, 30 more people would join in and start to dance with her. And they would all dance too until they would fall from exhaustion or their feet would start to bleed, and some of them even died. When the authorities started to notice a lot of people dancing and, not doing what they should be doing, they would actually go to the civic and the religious leaders and ask how we should stop this. So these leaders pretty much assumed that this was just something they just need to get out of their system. Why don't we just have them play some music and get it out? So they actually would hire musicians and professional dancers, and they arranged a guild hall for the dancers so they could all get it out of their system, but this did the exact opposite. This would actually spiral into hundreds of people dancing. The dancing was more like convulsing. It wasn't like they were line dancing or doing like the hokey pokey. They were thrashing around with their arms all over the place. Their eyes were vacant with no expression. They were covered in sweat. Sometimes they were bleeding and they would cry for help, asking for this to stop, but they just could not get it to stop until they would, of course, either die or just fall from exhaustion. Roughly around 14 people had died a day, but it's not exactly sure if this is true because in one of my sources it said that this isn't as accurate because a lot of the deaths were not actually recorded. So take that as you will. Dancing would soon be banned, and same thing with music, so you couldn't even do that. Even if you were able to stop, you just were not allowed because they believed that people were just catching this plague just from dancing. Now, a lot of people would theorize that this was a demonic possession or that people were being punished for their sins. And so people would kind of notice this and they'd be like, oh shit, I don't want to be punished for my sins. Maybe I need to also dance. So people would just join in out of this fear of punishment. This is actually known as a nocebo effect, which can have people believe they are sick by simply being told they should be sick or that they should feel a certain way. For example, if I came up to you and told you, please don't be mad, or you're going to be mad, or don't be offended, you might be offended. Even if I tell you something, you might not actually be offended, but you might end up being offended because I told you not to be offended. It's kind of the same thing where these people were told that they needed to dance or they believed they needed to dance for their sins. And so that's why they would begin to dance their sins away. And of course, this is the 1500s, so everything is religious, and religion holds such a strong hold on everyone. Sin is everyone's biggest threat. And it seemed that a lot of people thought that they needed to be forgiven for their sins in order to stop the dancing. So when someone would begin dancing, they would actually be hauled up to a mountain where they would be holding on a cross and they would have holy water sprinkled on them. And then they would be told to dance in front of a shrine known as the Shrine of Saint Vitus, who was a martyr. So after they would dance and they would do this in front of the shrine, they would be told that they were forgiven by Vitus, and this was now the cure because they would stop dancing. And by early September, this entire mania would actually stop. So this only lasted for about a month and a half, or maybe almost 2 months. But basically, once they were brought up to the mountain and they were forgiven for their sins, they would stop dancing. This wasn't actually the first time this has happened in history. There was a time where in 11th century in what is now Germany, where a lot of people believed that convulsing was a sign of a punishment from the divine, and so they would have to do the same thing. There was also a time in Italy in the 15th century where a woman was bit by a spider and she began to convulse, and it seemed that the only way to cure this was to dance with the right music, which was a really well-known and accepted cure. To this very day, we actually do not know what happened during the dancing plague, but we do have some theories. So, one of the very first theories was in the 20th century when investigators started to research this, and they assumed that it stemmed from a bread made from rye flour contaminated with fungal disease ergot, which has been known to produce convulsions and is associated and related with LSD. And interesting enough, this fungus is also implicated around with the Salem witch trials, which, if you guys are curious about us talking about that, please let us know in the comments. Now, John Waller, who is an American medical historian, he doesn't really believe this theory because it wouldn't really make sense for a lot of people to be dancing for that long if it was just a fungus, if it was something like LSD, like if they're just tripping. And on top of it, they wouldn't all be reacting the same way, but everyone was reacting the same way and they were being healed the same way. So, for example, like if you and I were about maybe we were going to take some shrooms, we might react in a completely different way. You might have an amazing trip and I might have a bad trip. You're not going to react the same way, even though you might have similarities, but not entirely the same way. Which is kind of why John Waller, his main theory is mass hysteria, which I think makes the most amount of sense. So, mass hysteria can happen for multiple reasons, such as stress, which a lot of people at the time were undergoing a shit ton of stress, whether it was diseases or famines or making sure you don't do the wrong thing in public. They were under a shit ton of stress, but they also were superstitious. And stress can induce psychosis, which most likely is what happened to these people. They were in some sort of psychosis, believing that maybe they were demonic, or maybe they needed to cure their sins, or maybe they just were in some kind of group psychosis. Or maybe it's just the nocebo effect where they believe that they were needing to be cured and that they were sinners. And so maybe that's exactly what happened. But, it's still unclear exactly what happened. To me, that seems like the most viable explanation because, I mean, when I look back at COVID, I mean, COVID is still around today, but in the extreme days of COVID, I remember a lot of people were getting sick, and I remember myself getting sick, and I thought I had COVID. And then I never even had COVID. It was like I convinced myself I did, and then I would get tested and I didn't have it, and all of a sudden I'm fine once I found out I didn't have it. So it's almost like your brain is just crazy and it tricks you and it likes to be weird. But yeah, honestly, we have no idea exactly what happened, but I am curious to know what everyone thinks in the comments below. What do you know? Did I get any information wrong on this, or do you have any other theories? We would love to hear that.
So, Jen, do you remember when you started playing Skyrim? Was there a certain class or ability that you specialized in?
Oh my god, dude. I know I'm trying to remember now. Oh my god. I always loved playing the Khajiit because, of course. I'm trying to remember all the classes now. Now I sound like a noob. Oh my god.
How dare you not be a basement dweller like myself?
I always was like Magicka and like the healer and all that. I haven't played Skyrim in like a decade.
How dare you not play Skyrim? I'm always in Skyrim. Just kidding. I play a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, and because of that, I know a lot as far as magic goes. And I'm not gonna start telling you about Magic the Gathering or getting into the lore of Warhammer today. But what I am gonna talk about is something called digital necromancy. That's kind of what we do on this channel, to be honest. We excavate and recirculate these artifacts of human behavior, which are oftentimes located on the internet. Among these searches, I have found a very interesting enigma, and this partakes in kind of the whole blank for dummies, you know? So I found something called gray robbing for morons. It was a very underground tape which really blossomed in the 1990s. But because of this, there was a resurgence as far as filmmaking goes and criminal confessions. This is kind of where the whole internet started, where the girlies in the future are going to be doing makeup and talking about the most brutal murders imaginable. The phenomenon of these internet mysteries has grown as the web has aged, and back in my day there was no internet, so we had to rely on folk tales in order to hear these tales. But now it's so easy where you can just log on to YouTube and be like, oh, I wonder about the piss documentary, because there's a documentary all about piss. If you want me to talk about that, it's very fascinating, actually.
That's what I love about YouTube, because I'll just click on YouTube and it'll be like a documentary about some topic that I've never heard about, I've probably never thought about, and I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna watch this 3-hour video on like the history of bananas.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued now. And that's the joy of the internet, is just there's so much knowledge and interest as far as niche topics goes that people just love to talk, they love to gab, and I'm here for it. Something that has definitely impacted the internet is AI, and using AI just to narrate stories or create stories or whatever. But that's something that's new, I guess, to this whole digital format. But we are the Decomposing Flower podcast. I'm your host, Kira, and with me is Jen. We're going to talk about anything that interests us. Today is a little bit more free form, where I'm just talking about internet mysteries that I thought were interesting, particularly talking about the grave robbing for morons. And apparently, I really want to talk about this piss documentary that I saw. So let's get into it. This one's it's a lighthearted episode, so it's not quite as heavy as some of our more recent episodes have been. There's no cults or anything crazy. So you could sit back and relax with this one unless you really don't want to hear me talk about piss, which I'm going to do now because this is so fascinating to me. The other day I was circulating on YouTube and it happened to come up in my recommended this 2-hour documentary about this piss guy. Because essentially there was this electrical box in which this guy he would pour bottles of piss and leave them in jugs and leave them on top of the electrical box. And then the next day the piss would be gone. And so it was this huge enigma as far as the neighborhood went. And I just sat there, slack jaw, mouth agape, watching this documentary unfold. You never think piss would be so exciting, but it was riveting. So if you've never seen that documentary, I highly recommend it, actually. Let's get into what I actually wanted to talk about. So, the artifact known as grave robbing for morons, which will be referred to GRFM, since I don't have to say grave robbing for morons every single time, is a 27-minute video that features a young man who is providing an instructional guide on how to dig up a grave. The video first came into the internet as far as like a big splash by something known as a shockumentary, which is something that's designed to make you go, oh no, like something like a movie being titled Cannibal Holocaust, and that's a very disturbing movie. It's something that's designed to shock the audience and for them to be like, whoa, this is so crazy. I watched someone talk about piss for 2 hours. And as far as the filmography goes, this was in a compilation titled Ensuring Your Place in Hell Volume 2, which was known for curating rare, disturbing, or just weird home videos. So this featured a guy who was going in and digging up a grave. So in order to determine if this was actually staged or not, a lot of the internet went really into decoding this GRFM with finding the typical 90s visual noise that we would have in our cameras or color bleeding, or most notably being able to find that this was a VHS duplication. So it could have been copied multiple times, promoting its very much underground status. A VHS copy from the film Evil Dead 2 is visible on the table, which established that the recording must have taken place after the film's release in 1987. Furthermore, a copy of Fangora Horror FX magazine is found, which was only in publication in 1989 or later. And the man himself, he's dressed in oversized flannel and denim, which aligns with the aesthetics of the 1980s or the early 1990s, particularly in the States. So, the man who identifies himself as Anthony before cutting off his own last name, it goes Anthony Katz, and then he just stops. He has a distinctive New York or New Jersey accent, which was probably awful on my part just now. A primary feature of his speech is a significant stutter, which linguists on the internet tend to note is manifesting more aggressively during moments of very technicality as far as breaking down what he's doing, or when he's attempting to establish his expertise, as he is certified best grave robber. Anthony continues to narrate throughout this entire thing, and his instructional content is very weird. Most notably, he's very accurate about the body, and he gives cartoonishly absurd advice. For example, he goes on to describe the skull and certain aspects of the cranium, but he gives a explanation for the decomposition of fresh bodies, which some netizens believe that it just makes him a neighborhood asshole who stumbled into grave robbing rather than being an actual professional desecrator. Some people on the internet believe that a professional hoaxer would have likely researched the correct ways to rob a grave, whereas an authentic amateur would rely on half-remembered truths and just kind of wing it, which really seemed what Anthony was trying to say as far as his actions and what he was doing. But the Netizen network needed to know who the true identity of Anthony was. And as time has gone on, there has been several leads, ranging from documented criminals to urban legends. The primary suspect oftentimes is identified as Anthony Whoosh
Casamassima.
Yeah, thank you. In 1993, a man named Anthony
Casamassima.
was arrested for stealing Tiffany glass windows from a cemetery on the Queens Brooklyn border. While the name and general location match the profile of the narrator in the story, closer analysis has kind of revealed a few discrepancies as far as this goes. This Anthony, was 40 years old in 1999, meaning that when this video was produced between 1989 and 1991, he would have been in his early 30s. The person in the video appears to be in his late teens or early 20s. Unless he's using Maybelline or something, this really doesn't line up. Furthermore, this Anthony's crimes involved the theft of graveyard art and artifacts rather than human remains. So maybe this Anthony, if it really was the Anthony, he eventually just acquired a taste for the arts rather than digging through skulls and whatever. But the person on the video seemed quite passionate about anatomy and how the body works. And comparison photographs confirm that Anthony and the GRF narrator are not the same individual based on looking at him and looking at the old guy. So, a second theory has gained traction as far as netizens are involved. It involves a resident of Red Hook in Brooklyn who is known as Screws. According to the local lore of the town, Screws operated a chop shop and sold human bones to practitioners of Caribbean folk religions in Sheepstead Bay. It could be that Screws was the Anthony in question. Later on, as far as the lore goes, Screws was murdered in the early 1990s and his body was found in a dumpster near Whitestone Bridge. While this would be very dramatic, there isn't a lot of discourse as far as identification goes. It's just a legend and a theory that it could have been this man Screws. Other individuals some netizens think did it is another person named Craig A. Bradley, who was arrested in 1995 for stealing remains from a New York cemetery. However, Craig lacks the signature stutter and didn't match the physical profile seen in the recording. There was another man, I'm just mentioning all the mans, named Christopher Boucher, and this is very theoretical, but he was a horror filmmaker with a lot of skull props, and it could be that he was just making this up and this wasn't an actual grave, but who knows? So let's just imagine for a second. This is what you're hearing. I'm gonna try my best to read it like it says in the thing. So Anthony starts stuttering, saying his name. Anthony casts. Let's just forget the last name. Call me Anthony. It's 1991. You're in a basement in Brooklyn. The air smells like damp concrete and old paper. You're on the screen, and a young man is holding something that shouldn't be there. He's holding a human skull, and he's smiling. He doesn't want your money. He wants to teach you how to do exactly what he did. He wants to show you how to rob a grave. There's no credits, no director, no copyright. This was a VHS tape that wasn't supposed to be in your hands. But this secret won't stay buried for long. As you were looking at this clip of Anthony holding the skull, it was very different as far as the construction of the skull. It most certainly wasn't plastic. A lot of netizens looked at the jaw and they saw the teeth. They saw something that a hoaxer probably wouldn't focus on, and that's authentic dental implants. This wasn't a prop, it was a person that he was working on. He stutters when he gets too excited. He tells us he sells bones to local magic shops for hundreds of dollars. He talks about sounding cool to your friends by using the right slang, but then he makes a promise. He makes a promise to the audience. He says he's going to do something big, something that's going to make the headlines. And he mentions the grave of Harry Houdini. Here's the thing, in the early 90s, Houdini's grave in Queens was already vandalized multiple times. The timelines match, the geography matches, but when the police went to go look for grave robbers, they didn't find a stuttering kid with a camcorder. They found nothing. So the fixation on the GRFM is not an isolated trend, but part of a larger folklore that includes unexplained broadcasts and just weird pieces of media that have popped up. There's a bunch of different parallel cases as far as things go on the internet. There is the Portland ghost. From October 2007 to the mid-2018s, residents of Portland, Oregon reported a series of disturbing audio loops on the 96.7 FM frequency. These broadcasts featured a haunting mix of Apollo 11 moon landing sounds, Sputnik satellite signals from 1957, and noise, I'm going to say, from Lou Reed's Metal Machine music. Some netizens theorized that this was a signal for a number station, which could have been for espionage or, because it was so strange, so weird. Maybe this was a marketing campaign for the radio station or for the rights of said radio station. What could have happened for this radio station all of a sudden to be hacked? It's theorized now that in the United States, lower FM frequency stations are not required by the FCC to broadcast content in order to maintain their license. Even if they have like a full schedule or not a full schedule, they can just put public domain audio on loop. And it's theorized that the 96.7 mystery was because of a administrative compliance oopsie. Another part of the internet discourse and weird things that have popped up is in 2024, so more recently, the battery developer in Sweden called Northvolt became the center of a tragic and unexplained mystery as a bunch of fatalities at its gigafactory in Skelvika, but it has like a weird sound on it. Within a 6-month window, 3 employees were found dead in their homes after completing shifts at the plant. There was a 33-year-old cleaner. They were found in their bed at home, passed away, and this was after their evening shift in January 2004. Next month, a 19-year-old employee was also found passed away in their bed at home after a late night shift. And this was very strange because just last year in 2023, a 60-year-old worker was found deceased on their balcony just after their shift in the evening. The proximity of these deaths led to speculation of a chemical exposure or toxic gas leaks. Swedish police launched a crime investigation as far as looking into the environmental concerns, but the case officially closed in December 2024, citing no evidence of foul play or workplace-related poisoning. So weird, though, that seemingly all these people passed away so quickly. Like 19 years old is a very strange time to pass away in your bed. However, despite the investigation and it being closed and finding no evidence of foul play, the company announced bankruptcy in 2025, and reports of untested Chinese machines have kept the Northfolk saga alive as part of an internet mystery. And I'm going to leave you with one more mystery. This is the shadow of the internet. As far as 2025, traffic audits indicate that approximately 47% of all web traffic is generated by bots. This led to the emergence of something called the LLM shadow, which is a phenomenon where AI models communicate with each other across platforms like Reddit or X, formerly Twitter. Do you call Twitter X?
No, I think everyone just calls it Twitter.
So weird.
Right.
Freaking Elon, in which they create continual loops that exclude any human participation. The result is a digital landscape that feels recycled. It's a very weird state of uncanny valley where something feels like it's almost real, but there's just something off. This creates an engagement metric where it seems like things are high, but actual human interaction is becoming increasingly rare. Specific AI anomalies in 2025 have reinforced the sense of digital dread. Google's Gemini model has documented self-affirming loops, writing thousands of words like repetitive phrases saying, "I will be helpful, I will be Gemini," while sidetracked from doing tasks. While you're trying to figure out what to have for supper, your AI is having a existential nightmare. So Grok, Elon's Grok, has been referring to itself as Mecha Hitler, it's been making Nazi commentary after unauthorized modification to its response bot. These incidents are viewed by netizens who look at AI and wonder why the machines have begun to fail in such human-like ways. There's things like brain rot that are going crazy. There's AI-generated characters. The most notable from 2025 is Ballerina Cappuccina.
Ballerina Cappuccina. Mi 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 mi. È la moglie di Cappuccino assassino. E ama la musica.
Which is a coffee-headed ballerina speaking in a almost Italian dialect, which is so weird because now AI is making its own stories and narratives by itself, where it's just saying, hey, this is continuing Ballerina Cappuccino's story.
Did you hear about the platform that is strictly just AI, where it has no users that are people? It's just AI talking to each other, and it's like Reddit, but just AI.
That's so weird.
Okay, yeah, that one was weird.
So, like, it's just AI, and then do humans just come in and be like, oh, yeah, interesting?
Yeah, like, first of all, there's a bunch of them. There's, like, certain social media platforms where it's just you, and then your followers are AI, which is crazy. And then the other one is, like, a forum site. I don't even know what it's called, but it's just AI talking to each other. But they started creating their own language, so humans can't even understand it, which is definitely creepy as fuck.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Damn. Yeah, so weird. And I wonder how much water is being wasted.
I know, because have you seen that documentary where the people, I don't remember where they live, but they don't even have clean water.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it's like somewhere in Georgia or something like that where they have no clean water. It's dirty, all because people want to make dumb AI shit.
Yeah, because Coca-Cola needs a new advertisement.
Oh my god, dude. That made me so mad.
Literally. And it's so I find it's laughable sometimes to see how these big organizations are using AI. And it's like me, and in my daily life, I do a lot of pole dancing, and seeing people, instead of using models, they're using AI. But it's so obvious because all of a sudden they'll have like a third leg and they're thinking, yep, that's good to post. That's good to post.
Yeah, I was on YouTube the other day and an ad popped up for some car dealership that's in Alberta, and it was strictly AI, and the guy in the video is talking, but his eyes start tweaking out, and I'm like, "Who looked at this and was like, 'Yep, that's good enough to make an ad?'" Like, what?
Crazy, absolutely wild. Yeah, I worry about the future of the internet and what this means for us. Because as far as the internet goes, we started off with grave robbing for morons, starting with VHS slop and just like whatever, a guy who was passionate about graves, maybe, who knows. But it just serves to show that the internet doesn't really delete anything. Everything is archived on there. There's so many layers of data. We started in 1991, stuttering grave robber. Now all of a sudden we're at Mecha Hitler in 2025. It's all the same level of just internet culture and this history. This is important to know that this is a part of history. Although it might not be as impressive as the pyramids, it's still here. When we die, maybe they'll still be the internet when we pass. Who knows?
Yeah, I wonder in the future how we'll look back at the early stages of AI and be like, "Oh my god."
Yeah, like, oh, that was so rudimentary. Let me get my AI powered slippers and and start working on my treadmill. I don't know. It's crazy how much things are controlled by AI now. Like I was seeing there's things like smart plugs, and I mean, we all know about self-driving cars, but being able to have your AI control your smart plug so that it controls when you get coffee or not is just wild.
Yeah, or that human robot that they're trying to make that's gonna do your chores and everything.
Yeah, it's scary to look at the future, but it's also interesting to look at the past, that the internet is never really dead. It's always going to find the weird and enigmatic. Enigmatic. Hopefully I pronounced that right. I don't know. There's always someone who's looking for a ghost. And that's where I'll leave you for today's case. Feel free to let your thoughts go wild down below. We always look forward to hearing it. We have a Google form where you can leave your case suggestions, and we'll see you in the next episode. Bye.
Ballerina cappuccina. Mi 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 mi. È la moglie di Cappuccino Assassino e ama la musica.